Hello and welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Before you is the top of the line SWFA HD 5-20 model. This is illuminated. Typically, the illuminated model is around like 11 or 1200. The non-illuminated model is around 1000. And when they went on Black Friday sale, they were like the $800 to $900 price point. But these things just popped up for like 700 bucks, brand new from SWFA themselves. So that's got me thinking, one, is it just because they're able to afford to lower the price on these because they don't have a storefront anymore? Or two, are they starting to phase out the entire lineup? Regardless to what's happening internally with SWFA, they still honor their warranties by replacing the entire optic typically. I don't know if that's going to be changing moving on down the line, but as of right now, if you do have a problem with one of these and they don't have it in stock, typically you have to wait until they get them in again from Japan, and that takes a couple of weeks or so. But with all that out of the way, what do you get for your money's worth? Ironically enough, I bought one of these well before I started the channel. In fact, it was my first big boy optic. I bought this along with the 12x and the 10x fixed and the 3 to 15 first focal plane variable actually at the time. I ended up toying around with all of those and figuring out which one was best for me and selling the rest. And at the time, I thought this was the best one, but it was too much scope for me and thus I sold it. Anyway, what does your money buy you? You get the HD box, which is black as opposed to the standard white. You still get the same Mil Quad reticle, but you still have all of the good SWFA features that you've come accustomed to over the years. If you're unfamiliar with what those are, we're going to briefly touch over all of them. If you like the burl wood that I'm using as my current desktop, please let me know because I'm trying to see if maybe I can go with different colors or different backgrounds just to change up how these unboxings unfold. You really don't get much in the way of lavish ingredients. In here, all you have is a battery and an Allen key. That is it. As far as the scope, that's basically it. And there's no instruction manual or anything. In fact, I didn't flip over the box. Let's see what that says. A whole lot of nothing that we need to know about. The scope only comes in a regular plastic bag and doesn't include any sort of lens protection whatsoever. But that doesn't bother me all too much, especially if the scope is really high quality and comes in at a very affordable price point. Weight is one of those things that anyone in the shooting community can appreciate, whether you're looking for a particularly light scope for a hunting build or a heavy scope for a tactical build. At 31.5 ounces for an HPVO like this, that is not too far off from what the standard usually is, or what the normal is, I should say. PST Gen 2 5-25, guess what? Comes in at the exact same weight to the 100th of an ounce. So it's really not that heavy and more than acceptable for its magnification range. Looking at the fit and finish on this, the anodizing does have a little bit more of a sheen to it than most other manufacturers. And you can see, you hear it a little bit when I scratch it with my nail. There's very light marks, but wiping it off of your finger, it comes right off. The construction on these and the materials sound absolutely rock solid, not tinny whatsoever. It sounds like you have a really nice thick tube that's going to withstand a lot of abuse. And that's one of the key points with the HD series. It's supposed to be heavy duty. And with all that being said, let's start off on the back on the eyepiece. You will note there is a lock collar on this, just like every other HD one, and that is extremely tight. All right. Not one, but two microfiber towels in conjunction to get this thing to come loose. This shouldn't be that tight. Someone from the factory really jammed this thing up. However, the threads on this thing, very, very little wiggle on those threads. Super smooth and very precise. What you're supposed to do with the lock collar is not put it in a vise and jam it, but just take the two, oppose a little bit of pressure, and you see that nice and tight, and we can come back over here, loosen that up whenever we want, and adjust it. On to the magnification ring, we have 5 up at 12 o'clock, and 20 exactly at 6, so 180 degrees, which is standard across most optics. That sound you heard was actually my thumb cracking. Super smooth and absolutely silent. However, this thing absolutely needs a throw lever. If you're going to buy this thing and expect to run it in a more, how should I say, dynamic environment, a throw lever is going to be your friend. Again, you have the exact same anodizing as the tube, which I said earlier is pretty slick, And the same thing applies here. These grooves that they milled into the side, they look pretty nice, and they are consistent with what we see on the back of the eyepiece, but unfortunately they don't offer that much purchase. As you can see, I could just slide right over it, and I'm gripping this thing pretty hard. So definitely something to take into consideration. You're going to need a throw lever on this thing. Onto the illumination control, we're first going to take a look at the battery compartment, which has very nice smooth threads on that as well. And already I like it because the cap for the battery versus the illumination control is much smaller, and you're not going to accidentally grab it. You have a massive spring on this cap, and the standard CR2032 battery has a very nice double prong spring pad on. The niceness of the illumination control does not stop there. This control has a little bit of wiggle in the detent, but the detent is so sharp and crisp that it feels, I would say, among the top illumination control dials I've ever touched. A little bit of wiggle, but it snaps right over. Like a piece of spaghetti getting snapped in half when it's dry, right out the box. Absolutely phenomenal. Unlike the battery compartment for the illumination control, the side focus and the illumination control are almost the same diameter with the exact same sort of grooves and splines on it. So if you're not paying attention with how far in towards the erector housing you are, you might grab the wrong one. Going from infinity down to its minimum at 50 yards, I believe this is, you'll see that we're just about 180 degrees out. So there isn't a huge amount of finite adjustability on this thing, but it is very smooth, though very hard to turn. So you shouldn't have to worry about this thing coming loose on you and getting bumped out under recoil. As much as I love the Classic Series fixed power SWFA models like we see here with the 16X, the turrets leave something to be desired. Sometimes they have a good click, sometimes they don't, sometimes it rolls over the detent, sometimes they snap. It really depends on temperature, the time of day, the exact model you have, how much wear and tear you have on it. They're not the most consistent. Despite the fact I love these things, the turrets, again, could use an upgrade. And an upgrade is exactly what you get with the HD series. You can see we have 10 mils per rotation as opposed to 5, and we do have a rotational indicator underneath. These are not locking, however, both the elevation and the windage. So if you're looking for locking turrets, you're going to have to look somewhere else. However, if we are to directly compare this with the PST Gen 2, guess what? That doesn't have locking turrets either, so take that for what it's worth. Tight lockup in the detent, we have a little bit of play. But very similar to the illumination control, sharp positive detent. You know exactly where you are once you twist this dial. They sound and feel incredible. On to the windage control, you can clearly see we have 0 with 1s in either direction, and I like how they illustrated the actual erector housing itself with the left and the right as opposed to the knob. It's primarily because if you're over here, it might just be an easier way for you to figure out, okay, the numbers are going up this way, which means that you're going to the right. Again, though, you have the exact same sound and feel as the elevation, which is always nice to see. So without further ado, let's get behind this thing and see what it's like to actually use.
All right, let's do this. The SWFA HD 5-20 is a 30mm tubed first focal plane HPVO or high-powered variable optic featuring the mil quad reticle. For some of you, this won't be that fancy, but for some of you, it'll also be just simple enough. It strikes a decent balance with that, even though there are some optics that, or rather companies, that choose a little bit better reticle. But this is a little bit unique. Instead of having hash marks or dots at every full mil interval, these have little diamonds that are see-through. So you could hold on those little diamonds on your target, theoretically, if you could see it through the diamond. For the astute viewer out there, you might notice that the reticle doesn't look perfectly sharp. And for that, there is a reason. There's just something up with this scope. No matter what I did, I could never get the reticle being perfectly sharp at either extremes, the 5x or the 20x. So I opted to get something that was as good as possible for both. As far as the illumination, it is extremely, extremely dim. Even on its brightest setting here in a dark room, you can just make it out, but only just. The turrets on this are very good. They're much better than the standard classic version of the SWFA scopes, but I still think I prefer the PST Gen 2 turrets a little bit more. Doesn't mean that these are bad, but there are better options out there, especially in this $1,000 plus price point.
SWFA HD 5 to 20. We are currently at 10x on the magnification, but pay very close attention to the reticle. I'm going to back this out all the way to its minimum of 5, and the reticle maintains a fairly high level of sharpness. Now we're going to take it back up to 10, indicated currently right there, and we're going to slowly increase it to its maximum. See what happens with the reticle? It loses focus. This should not be a thing that happens. I can't describe it. It's the first time I've really noticed this being a problem. This should be sharp from minimum to maximum magnification. Every once in a while we can tweak it, or rather I can tweak it, but if I adjust the rear eyepiece, which is not fast adjusting, so it's going to take a little bit of time.
Like I already mentioned, I got it as good as I could on both extremes, but it's never really truly perfect.
You can see even after I screwed it in a lot, we still don't have excellent sharpness on the reticle. If I slowly back it out, it builds back up to beautiful levels. Currently we're at about an indicated 12x. So I got to figure out what the hell is going on with this, but it makes no sense. Not a great start. Anyway, the Milk Quad reticle lines up beautifully, and let's hope that it at least tracks as good as it looks in this case.
I think what also might have something to do with how the reticle looks right now is that we're in a slightly darker environment, so keep that in mind.
So 4 and 4 is beautiful, basically perfect. It is. And when it turns back, let's keep climbing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So across 10 mils of elevation, we gained just about a single click, or we gained 1%. This is well within the specs of most big manufacturers, so I'm going to give that a pass. Returns to 0 up here perfectly fine. Let's go back to adding plus 10. Beautiful, exactly where we were. Back up to 0. And one more time just for shits and giggles. Exactly where we were. Now, real quick, let's check and see any slop in the erectors. None whatsoever. This is a beautiful performance on the tracking. As far as the reticle sharpness, I'm going to have to inquire a little bit more.
I played around with my settings quite a lot to try to figure out if I can get the reticle a little bit sharper, and it never seemed to work out. So I'm going to leave it as just an optical flaw with this scope. Yes, I had one of these a very long time ago, but that's like 6 or 7 years ago. A lot of things can change in that time, including someone's ability to notice little things like that. So maybe these were always like this, maybe this one was slightly defective, maybe there's a reason why SWFA was dropping the price on these a considerable amount. The guy that sent this in to me got this for about half price of what they normally go for. So it leaves me wondering if maybe they're doing something with the lineup. Anyway, focusing our attention on our 400-yard brick building, you might note that I'm using both hands to bring up the magnification to an indicated 10x here. Here, the image is very nice, sharp, clear, with good brightness, colors, and contrast. The reticle also looks pretty damn sharp. If you're like me and you shoot a lot of in between magnifications, so this being a 5 to 20, I'd honestly only ever use 20x if I was trying to spot shots on paper or spot for somebody else. But the 5 to 15, maybe even 18 range is the real sweet spot. Here at 20x, you can see that the reticle does look a little bit better than what we saw earlier in lower light environments, but it's still considerably softer than what most reticles can possibly get to. Adjusting the side focus on this takes a little bit of getting used to. It's really stiff and it's a pretty narrow window, so you really have to be careful and delicate with how quickly you adjust it. The image looks good, even though there is a lot of mirage going on because I filmed this during the winter. I know I have a huge backlog of stuff, but it seems like an okay enough image. Maybe not $1,200 good, but in that $700-800 range, it's not half bad either. Having a nice image is all fine and good, but how does the image hold up if you aren't perfectly behind the scope? Yes, I know for most optics, you're going to hope that you're going to be in a good cheek weld and a good position. But if you're not, how well does the scope maintain its ability to be sharp and clear? Well, the image here, about 900 yards, is pretty damn good. You can see all those individual struts that hold that tower together, and you might be able to pick up a couple of rivets here and there. But let's move our attention a little bit side to side, and you will quickly notice that not only the image, but also the reticle become very soft and dark very quickly. In fact, the eye box on this thing at 20x is one of the tightest examples I've gotten behind, and I don't know what it is. It's only a 4x multiplier, a 5 to 20. It's a 30mm tube with a 50mm front objective, so it's not like it's pushing the boundaries of performance or the glass in any way, shape, or form. And these are made in Japan, as well as all of the SWFA lineup. Here at 10x, the image does get a little bit better, as it should, and at 5x, it does a much better job. However, you will note, well before we get into the shadows, both the reticle and the image itself fall apart rather quickly. It's one of the worst performance of any scope that I have seen while doing this test, and it really kind of upsets me because SWFA is usually a company that does extremely well. As far as a brutal eye box test, to be able to look through this thing at 5x is quite good actually. Doesn't mean that the image is going to be stellar or great, but if you needed to get behind it quickly and at least figure out where you had to be to get behind it, 5x is more than sufficient. 10x gets about average for what most 10x scopes are. In fact, maybe even a touch better than 10x. But again, you have to be perfectly behind it to use it effectively. At 20x though, good luck. Because even if you're in a perfect position on a bench, good cheek weld, everything is as solid as can be, it's challenging. From me testing this thing out for a couple of weeks, I never had a really good experience behind it. One area that is often overlooked is when you start adding elevation to a scope at magnification at distance, sometimes the image doesn't hold up. At 20x at 0 mils added elevation for a 50-yard 0 on a 22 LR, so you can roughly figure out it's about 100-yard 0 for a 5.56, give or take, about an inch or so. This is a pretty standard image that what you would see. Again, pardon the mirage, but it's ultimately not that bad. However, add 10 mils of elevation to this thing, and the image actually, in my eye, gets a little bit sharper, a little bit clearer, and the contrast creeps up just a little bit. So this thing performs better than most. Most often than not, a scope will maintain its level of clarity and sharpness, but beyond a certain point, they will start to lose it. Here, it actually increases it, so it's quite a good performance in this regard. However, not everything can be good. The low light performance here, as you can see at 5x, seeing the ambient sky to the left and looking through the scope, it is a much darker looking image. Not only that, but the color palette changes slightly. It's not the first time we've seen it, and I doubt it'll be the last, but this is a very noticeable dark image looking through this. And I hate to say, it doesn't get much better. Focusing our attention on our 400-yard brick building with the illumination on full, you could actually see it. The illumination, that is. As far as the brick building, it's very hard to pick up. From 5x, it only seems to get worse the higher we go, which is about on average. Picture your iris closing down when you're in bright sunlight. But now imagine you're not in bright sunlight and you're in a dark area and it closes down, it lets less light in. Similar concept applies here. And you have a very dark, almost unusable image. And again, the illumination is only good for about the top 3 brightness settings in this dark of an environment. So not great. So let's get into some comparisons, because everybody likes the comparison section, and I don't blame you. This is where you get a real feel for how a scope performs against other potential competitors. And the first up is going to be the Arken SH4 6-24. I had this thing a very long time ago, and you know what? It still pops up every once in a while as being a decent optic. The controls on them are very good. The reticle, as you can see here, in my opinion, is a better reticle. But again, reticles are very subjective. One thing you can and will notice is just the view looking through the two. I didn't mention it because it makes a lot more sense to talk about it when you can really truly see it side by side with something else. The SWFA is tiny to look through. Some scope manufacturers will limit the view looking through it to try to increase or keep the resolution of the glass a little bit higher. Unfortunately for SWFA, neither really apply. The Arken really pulls ahead as far as the overall view looking through it, and the clarity and crispness of the image and the reticle at every magnification. And that is something that isn't just here at 400 yards, it continues out to 900 yards. Because guess what? If something is good, it's going to be good basically everywhere. The only thing with the Arken is when I filmed it, it was a quite hazy day. That slight haze that you see the image isn't anything to do with the scope or the camera. It was just the humidity in the air during the summer when I filmed it. So if you have any questions as to why the image on the Arken video doesn't look as clear as the SWFA HD, that is why. The Arken might be made in China, whereas the SWFA is fully made in Japan, but the Arken also costs Chinese prices, not Japanese premium prices, or halfway premium prices, I'll say. Arkens can be had on sale for like low 300s, sometimes with even goodies for like close to 400. They really do offer a lot of potential performance for the price. Now, I can't really vouch for their durability and longevity, but I never had a problem with either of mine for as long as I've had and used them. Their exterior anodizing is a little bit thin, but that's about the only downside I've seen. Next up is going to be still probably my favorite 3-18. That's because I've run it and beat it on everything, and it just continues to love getting abused. It is, of course, the Meopta Optica 6 3-18x50 in first focal plane, featuring the MRAD1 reticle. This thing regularly goes for the same price as what the SWFA goes for on super sale, and it is a vastly superior optic in my opinion. From my findings, here at about 10x on both of them, there's a clear winner. And once you increase them both to their maximum, there still continues to be a clear winner. These are both at their maximum, so 20x on the HD on the left, 18 on the Meopta on the right. The field of view is not only better on the Meopta, but the images look awfully similar to their rough size side by side. Just look at the grading, look at the window. There's not a whole lot of difference between these two for a whopping 2x. The image is brighter on the Meopta, granted a little bit different shadow profile from where the sun was, but everything about the Meopta is better, and for less money. So why wouldn't you want to do that? I just don't understand. The Meopta also has an excellent track record with me. I have thousands of different rounds through it over the last couple of years, and unlike the SWFA, when you start shifting side to side and going out of its normal eye box range, the reticle and the image both maintain a very high level of sharpness well into the shadows. It really is the perfect 3-18. Capped windage, locking elevation, and with, in this case with the MRAD1 reticle, a truly usable and functional drop tree style reticle, and you could use it at 3x and still be able to pick up the center on it. It's just so good, and the illumination is actually visible most of the time as opposed to the SWFA. So if you're between these two, just go with the Meopta. In fact, go with the Meopta for most of these choices. Unless, of course, you have a much larger budget than you are leading on to believe. Then something like this, the Nightforce NX8 2.5 to 20x56 f1 first focal plane mil-XT'd reticle monster should be something that you could strongly consider, or should strongly consider. You can find these in non-FDE, regular black, for like the $1,800-ish price point. And for many of you, that's a lot of money. In fact, it's a lot of money for anybody. But the level of optical performance and feel, fit, and finish that the NX8 offers to the table is almost unparalleled. Just look at the view through the NX8. It is not just gigantic, but it is razor sharp from 2.5 to 20x with both the reticle and the image. Everything about the NX8 is perfect, with the exception that it doesn't have a locking elevation turret. But that is just, again, a personal preference for myself. It does have a capped windage, which is nice, and the illumination is adequate, and the reticle isn't truly fine-tuned for being used at anything other than 5x. But regardless to all those minor imperfections, it still delivers such an incredible performance for the price point that it really is a monster killer. For $2,000 or less, you're getting something that performs at a much higher level of performance than a lot of other scopes in its price point. There isn't a single person that I've talked to with an NX8 2.5 to 20 that isn't beautifully and hopelessly in love with it. It is that good. However, it's twice the price of this SWFA. But if you're looking for something that is going to be significantly better in every way, shape, or form, this is something that you might want to consider. However, you definitely want to save your pennies for it or sell off a couple other scopes if you're lucky enough to have that option and pick up something like this. You will not regret it. My last comparison that I'm going to make against this SWFA HD is going to be with the Gen 2 Razer HD 4.5 to 27 by 56. Why am I bringing this one up? Well, you could actually find these used for a couple $100 more. So it's a little bit better value as far as overall cost than the NX8. But it's a significantly larger and heavier scope than every other option that we've looked at so far. But again, if you're willing to spend about $1,000 on the SWFA, you could spend a couple $100 more and potentially buy something as good as this Razer. The Razer HD Gen 2 series of scopes, whether it's the 1 to 6, the 3 to 18, or this 4.5 to 27, are all home runs. You can't go wrong with either of them unless you're looking for a lighter weight option, which we're going to take a look at very soon. But as far as the overall performance of this thing, it's got everything you want in a tactical style, high-powered variable optic. And it'll have the best warranty in the business because Vortex will fix just about anything, even if you accidentally shoot it. I have personal experience with that, and you got to appreciate a company that's willing to go above and beyond for you. However, there are many more companies than just Vortex that are capable and willing to help you by literally bending over backwards to make sure that you're a happy customer. So don't take Vortex as being the only company to do that. There are a bunch of others, but Vortex is wildly known for doing that. But maybe it's because they actually have to use their warranty, so that can become a slippery slope of how you want to interpret it. But regardless, a lot of their products are very good. In fact, the last one we're going to look at is another Vortex product, but let's finish up with the Razer HD first. Colors, clarity, sharpness, in fact, the overall resolution of the Razer HD Gen 2 is basically legendary at this point. They're excellent scopes and have withstood the test of time and durability time and time again. So, if you could find one of these on a pretty good sale and you're strongly considering the SWFA, just get the Razer HD. Again, it's another scope you won't regret as long as you don't mind the 50 plus ounces that it weighs. Going from the heaviest Razer HD to the lightest Razer LHT. This is the Vortex Razer LHT or Lightweight Hunter Tactical 4.5 to 20 by 50. This is in the very similar magnification range to the SWFA, which is why it's here as a competitor. It's also similarly priced. It's a little bit more expensive than the SWFA, but only by like $200 or so, which really isn't that much. Are these two the same class of scope? Not really. The SWFA is much more in line with being a quote-unquote tactical scope. It's got 10 mils per rotation on both turrets. They're non-locking. It's got illumination, it's got a locking eyepiece, but it still doesn't fit that particular role quite well enough, in my opinion. You still absolutely need a throw lever, but you could use a throw lever on the LHT as well. But the non-locking turrets is a thing that, for me, on a tactical scope, is almost unforgivable. If you're shooting off of a bench or in the prone position, on a square range, and you're never running and gunning with it or hitting it into stuff or hunting with it, you can absolutely get away with non-locking turrets and never probably ever even notice that they're not there or needed. But if you're doing any of the other things, it's nice to have the comfort and knowledge of knowing that your zero isn't going to shift unless you want it to. Whether you're bumping it into stuff, maybe you're worried about recoil, you name it. Hell, I've had dipshits come up to me just trying to be funny and just grab your turret and go click, 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 and just screw up your zero. If you have a locking turret, you ain't got to worry about that. Even better, you have a capped windage and a locking elevation like what you have with the LHT, and you never have to worry about that. Or rather, you just have to worry about it a little bit less. But seriously, if that's the only reason why you want to get a locking turret, then maybe you don't really need it. But if you want it, you're not going to get it with the SWFA. You're going to get it with something like the LHT. And again, just like what we've seen with all of the other comparisons to this SWFA, the reticle maintains its sharpness from minimum to maximum magnification. The overall image is brighter, the view looking through the scope is larger, the perimeter of the scope body itself literally disappears when you're behind it. And it's also about 8-ish ounces lighter. Don't quote me on that, but it is a considerable amount lighter. In fact, the only thing that the LHT really needs is a throw lever, but most scopes need good throw levers to really take full advantage of them as a unit. The one thing, again, about the LHT that most people might not like is it only has 6 mils per rotation on the elevation. But for me, even if I'm shooting out at extended distances, that gets me out pretty far on most of my setups. So, long story short, the LHT is a much better scope overall as a package than the SWFA HD 5-20. I'm sure some of you out there with experience with the SWFA would probably disagree with me, but from my personal experience, everything that I've compared this thing to is a better scope overall for that particular price point. There isn't anything that really hits the exact same price point of the SWFA, with the exception of the Meopta, but the Meopta is one of the finest scopes money can buy as a whole package, especially for the price. This SWFA, to wrap it up in as nice a bow as possible as a conclusion, was a letdown. The exterior handling, the fit, the finish, all the controls were very, very good to borderline great. I really had higher hopes for this thing. Again, when I had mine many years ago, I remember it being too much of a scope. But there was something about it that made me choose going with the classic fixed 10 and 12x and selling this and the 3-15 first focal plane version. Ultimately, I can see why SWFA was dropping the price on these, as well as the entire lineup. I really, really hope that SWFA focuses their attention on their own sets of scopes, because they have not only great optics available, but it's in my opinion that they have so much untapped potential that's just waiting to be cultivated. The 1:6 HD was a bit of a letdown, but it was a robust scope. It did get sent in to get repaired, but in fact SWFA just replaced the entire thing. I don't think there's anything truly wrong with this scope. I think it might just be a design flaw overall. Anyway, do I recommend this scope? No. If you're in the market for it, there are plenty of comparisons I made for you that you should check out instead. With that, a huge thank you for all of my viewers out there, because without you, this channel wouldn't be going. So, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Stars subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.